Oh boy, this was painful. This doesn't mean that the game was shit, it mainly means that it was unnecessarily slow and tried to be smarter than it actually ended up being, but one step at a time. The South Koreans are mainly known for MMORPGs, but long before the current South Korean MMO trend there were single-player RPGs like Magna Carta, even though they were quite rare. Magna Carta, Tears of Blood, or simply known as Magna Carta in Europe and Japan, or Magna Carta Crimson Stigma in South Korea, is actually the second game of the franchise. The first game, called Magna Carta The Phantom Avalanche, is not only PC, but also Korean exclusive, released in 2001. I actually wanted to start with that one, but I couldn't make it run on my PC for some reason. But since supposedly this second game isn't a direct sequel but more of its own thing, well, that's why I decided to skip the original. I would have liked to play the original though. Maybe someday, but for now let's stick with the second game of the franchise, developed by Korean developer Softmax, a team that technically still exists today, but they left gaming altogether in 2015 to enter the stock market or something, and published by Banpresso in 2004 in Japan, by Atlas in 2005 in the USA, with this sweet ass deluxe edition, and by 505 Games Street in 2006 in Europe. The game also got a PSP port in 2006 exclusively in Japan. So in the world of Magna Carta, there are two races, the humans and the Yason. They lived in peace centuries ago, but as time went on, the human race got bigger while the Yason race dwindled. The latter started to hate the humans because of it. At some point, a war broke out between both races that is still going on to this day. The Yason are a race that need Chi, energy of the Tree of Light, to survive, but they found a new way to gather Chi from nature itself, not needing the tree anymore. So they think. And that started to turn the war in their favor. Now you play as Kaunitz, a human that is the leader of a mercenary group called Tears of Blood, working under Agrayan, coincidentally a dear friend of Kaunitz. In fact, both grew up together as orphans, trying to do everything they can to finally stop the war between humans and the Yason by using the last chance they have to win. The Tears of Blood come up with a solution: use forbidden magic to wipe out the Yason for good. Since this plan backfires quite early in the game though, heck, in the first 30 minutes or so, you now have to fall back and flee the scene, but you get attacked. And as the good leader that Kaunitz is, he sacrifices himself to save his group, even though it wasn't necessary because the fight wasn't that hard to begin with. But the game says, fuck you, you have to lose because plot. And no, this isn't the only time the game does this shit. Makes it seem that you are winning the fight, but then it forces you to lose it for convenience of the plot. Yeah, that's bad. So Kaunitz survives and meets a girl that lost her memory and has no idea who she is. So she gets the name of Wreath. But why she lost her memories, well, that never gets fully explained. I assume it has to do with the fact that the humans use the forbidden magic as their last resort and... you see, if I say much more than this, then you will instantly know who Wreath is, so yeah, I will stop here. Because for a while you will have no idea who she actually is, however, gradually the game will give you hints about her true identity, and you will know who she is long before it's actually revealed. But even if you don't get there on your own, the game will straight up tell you at some point, so do not worry. But before all that, Kaunitz and Wreath reunite with the Tears of Blood. They get a special mission to accomplish given by Agrayan, while trying to help Wreath out by taking her to the priestess of Ahmabad, because even Wreath herself believes that she might be a priestess from there. And maybe she is, or is she? But the Yasuo know way more about Wreath than the Tears of Blood, clearly shown by the fact that the Yasuo constantly tried to capture her for some reason. Wreath must have been a really bad girl before she lost her memories if the Yasuo want to capture and do, I don't know, with her. Or maybe they want to enjoy her big tits. But then again, Yasuo women also have big tits, so that can't be it. Don't worry though, it all gets revealed. But from there, the story takes quite a lot of twists and turns that aren't really that surprising, but not too bad either, and some events are quite interesting. The Tears of Blood is not what it seems to be. Heck, not even Kaunitz, Wreath and Agrayan are who they seem to be. The humans see the Yasuo as the enemy, while the Yasuo see the humans as the enemy, but both have been played by a third party that technically hates both races. And yes, politics will play a role in the story as well. There are flashbacks thrown here and there to explain the past of Kaunitz and 3 other main characters, which actually is important for the current story events in the game. But they seem irrelevant at first, and a few scenes actually are irrelevant. There is constant talk about the Light of Salvation that was supposedly used by the 8 heroes 50 years prior, and the Tree of Light and stuff that supposedly are not what they seem to be either, and honestly at some point I lost interest in all of that. I will explain later why. Look, the story is actually quite interesting overall. Sure, it seems generic at first, but slowly it turns into a somewhat intelligent telling about war and betrayal. However, there are 2 big problems here. For one, the story really picks up maybe a bit too late in the game, where probably many players would naturally give up on it. Yeah, 10 to 12 or maybe even later hours, 15, 16, 17, whatever, may not seem much, but until then the story gives nobody a real reason to stick around. It's not just a story that causes this, but again, I will get to that later by splitting it into 10 points that individually work, but put together they turn into kind of a mess. The second reason is that there are parts that aren't fully explained, like how Wreath even lost her memory. You can make many assumptions, but that's what they are. The game is more interested in throwing you on a loop with its little twists and big words to the point where they start to lose all meaning, as well the focus of its initial simple premise. It's almost like this was supposed to be a multi-part game or even an MMO, but everything got shoved together in a 60-hour single-player RPG, and seemingly they had to cut many corners or compress others to accomplish that, making the story suffer for it. Heck, maybe the developers even expected you to have played the original game first, who knows? But since that one never got released outside of South Korea, well, you know. The characters can be hit or miss, similar to liking the video and subscribing to the channel can be a hit or miss. Some work fine, but others seem irrelevant. Characters like Kaunitz, Wreath or Agrayan are quite fine. Their characteristics are very obvious, but their progression throughout the story actually makes sense and works. Well, almost. Kaunitz's short downfall didn't need to be that overdramatic, or should at least be better paced. Wreath didn't need to be this naive to the point where she even puts everybody in unnecessary danger, and Agrayan, well, he seems and acts smart in the beginning, even until towards the middle of the game, but towards the end, he falls into the typical trope character almost like he lost all his brain cells somewhere along the way. Even some of the bad guys, mainly the Yasuo, seem a bit better thought out. But here comes the problem. Your group has too many characters in it, which means they won't have enough time to be interesting, or they fall into the typical tropes, or they are outright useless. I've complained about a very similar thing in Eternal Sonata. In total, you will be able to play with over 10 characters, and while most of them have their characteristics and backstories, some others don't have anything. Characters like Raul, Justina, Rihanna or Haren have personality and a backstory to support how they are and what they do now. Of course, they also have their role in the story, but not as much as they should. Well, Raul adds a bit more than, for example, Haren or others, mainly because he is one of the legendary heroes, but still he could have had a bit more depth. Similar goes to Justina, who is a priestess of Amabat. Haren's backstory is just used as his motivation for why he even is in the Tears of Blood and nothing else, while Rihanna has a whole thing with her husband that seems mainly like a convenient way to introduce a character that in the end of the day wasn't necessary at all. Yeah, talking about her husband. But even Rihanna herself didn't really need to exist, especially not when she uses the same fighting style Haren does. Characters like Chris or Azel are on the same level as Haren or Rihanna, but with a major difference. They have zero backstory. At least Chris acts a bit as a, let's say, comic relief, and his father builds a plane for the group, but Azel is there just because he looks up to Kaunitz, and yeah, that's about it. Heck, Eonis is essentially the same thing. She's only there because the game needed a black magic user, but she could have been left out entirely and it wouldn't make any difference. Maya though, yeah, sadly she's even more useless outside of being a healer and looking cute. I say that because she's fucking mute. In itself, that's fine. I mean, Maya from Gaia 2 Dual Saga also started off as a mute character, but during that time she had personality and tried to communicate her own way until she starts to speak, sadly. However, Maya, not this one but this one, does none of that, and the game doesn't even try to make her a somewhat decent character. Serena is the last character that joins, and while her story is actually kind of interesting, she's one of those twist characters that the developers decided to throw in to surprise the player when it wasn't actually needed. Because what purpose does she ultimately have? To do what Wreath did. I don't want to spoil it, but if you play the game through, then you will see what I mean. On the villain side, the characters are maybe on the same level as Raul, meaning some of them like Aura are quite fine characters, but other lesser villains or even characters that are on your side are just there to act as progression points for the story, but that's about it. Now, graphically the game looks quite good. The colors are quite nice and there is good level of details in the background. The characters though can look a bit weird at times, especially when Wreath makes faces like these for who knows what reason. The music and sound are also good points of the game, outside of the voice acting that is, for the most part, absolute garbage. Just listen to the shit.
That's what the diagram means. Damn it! It wasn't the tears of blood that I should have been worried about. It was you who was behind all this. Don't think.
However, the major downfall of the game starts right here, because the game is unnecessarily painful to play even though it has some interesting ideas that aren't necessarily original. Point 1. The world you move around. I don't need to go much into the visuals, especially not when all of you have eyes in your head. I hope. However, essentially all areas in the game tend to be very narrow. While in itself that's not much of a problem, it will become a problem together with a few other elements in the game. However, backtracking? Oh boy, you will have to revisit the same areas a million times. No, I'm not joking, and the game isn't even ashamed of it. You do this without a team having to split. However, once you have to split the team in Colnitz's team, Rith's team, and then even Raoul's team, then you have to traverse the same areas even more often for some reason. So yes, backtracking is basically this game's bread and butter. Point 2. The camera is trash. It's not the fact that the camera follows you around with specific camera angles and then changes angle if you leave the area. Heck, games like, let's say Final Fantasy X did something similar to this. However, the problem is when the camera suddenly changes angle, the new angle is shit and you run into the enemy. It gets way worse in the battle because the camera is always pre-positioned and you cannot change the angle at all. So often you start with this piece of shit angle and you first have to search for the fucking enemy like an idiot. Point 3. 3 modes. This is one of the annoying aspects of the game. So you have 3 modes, a dash, a detect and a rest mode. The dash mode is the character running around normally like in any other RPG. However, here Colnitz, or whoever you are controlling, turns into a blind idiot that can't see 2 feet in front of him and runs into everything. See the small yellow circle? This is how far he can see, and that means while you can move around faster, you will constantly run into enemies and always get surprised by them. You will see later what that means. Detect mode means that this circle will be way bigger and thus you will be able to see enemies and chests that are in front of you. You know, since the battles are not random, the enemies are all on the field after all, and technically you can avoid them, but it's rather a hard thing to do. However, in this mode, you constantly have to have your sword drawn and actually walk around. Yes, walk. So imagine walking from city to city or village to village in these narrow and rather linear spaces just to avoid not getting surprised by enemies. Whoever came up with this idea didn't think things through, but more on the battle later. Finally, there is rest mode, and that means you can stop on middle of the field, kneel down, rest for a bit to regenerate your HP. So on top of the items you can use during or outside of the battles, the kind of hotels you can rest in villages or cities, you also have this. Meaning there is 0 point to use items or even sleep in the kind of hotels when you have a rest mode. Point 4. The surprise effect. For some reason the developers thought, yeah, let's make the game really annoying, and this ties into the previous point. As explained, you have a dash and detect mode. In dash mode, if you run into enemies, you always get surprise. That means that the battle starts and you won't be able to move or do anything for a while. So you just stand there while you take a pounding. I mean, I get the idea behind you getting surprised and that's fine. After all, if you are in detect mode, you can do the same thing to the enemy, but the problem here is that in dash mode, you can absolutely never escape getting surprised. And mind you, it's almost impossible to avoid the enemies in these narrow ways. So what's the point in the dash mode then? Seriously, the only point of it is when you've defeated all enemies and have to run all the way back since the enemies only respawn after a few story events happened. So technically, you can also forget about grinding, because the enemies do not respawn until a specific story event happened. In the attack mode you will never get surprised, but once again you move around like a snail. The problem in surprising the enemy is that not only do you have to walk around, which slows down the pace of the game dramatically, but if you want to surprise the enemy, sometimes you have to stop and wait until the enemy turns their back to you. And obviously this slows the pace of the game even more. Worse is when the enemies don't even have a moving pattern. They move around randomly, so sometimes when they turn their back to you and you walk towards them to surprise them, they suddenly turn around. So this means you lost time waiting for them to turn around, and then you also lose your chance to attack first. But at least you never get surprised in this mode, so yeah, that's a plus. These moves might have seemed like a good idea on paper, but in practice this clearly doesn't work well. Point 5. Chi system. Now let's tackle the battle. Here, for every single attack you use, doesn't matter if it's physical or any kind of magical spell, you use up Chi, which is here. You know, fire, water, wind, ice, celestial, etc. The brighter the Chi, the more chances you will have to use an attack or spell that requires that Chi to be used, and they will be slightly stronger as well. However, if there is zero Chi, you can't do anything at all. Sure, the Chi recharges itself, indicated by these small circles around it, and it would be fine if the spells used up Chi, but physical attacks as well? Some of the most basic attacks with the sword use up Chi, and if you don't have any more Chi, then fuck you! This system is like in a lot of other RPGs that use MP. Don't have MP? Then you can't use magic. Typical, right? But at least you can still attack with physical attacks. Here, it's an overall fuck you if there is no Chi. Sure, you can use an item to recharge the Chi faster, change the style, or even use different attacks that use different Chi, but still, this could have been simplified or more accessible. Point 6. Your style. As stated, you can change your style during battle or outside of battle. So, all characters have their own initial styles, and they can learn more by using scrolls that you can either find, win after boss battles, or earn in dojos. Yeah, around the world there will be people that can teach your characters new styles that can be used during battle, as long as you defeat all the teachers in that dojo. Each style has different combos that can be used, each with their own Chi. So each style starts with the first combo you can use during battle. Use it a few times and then you will learn a second one, and so on. Each style has an average of 4, maybe 5 combos that can be learned and mastered. Master a style and you will be able to use a critical combo by pressing down on the D-pad. This will turn into a special attack for each character that can use it, but to even get that far, you have to master the battle system. The same goes for when you learn a counter attack. You will see what I mean. But for now, the style system on its own is actually kind of fine and there isn't much to complain about. And yes, while with each new battle, the combo for each style will always start from the first one, once you've learned the upcoming combos, you just need to use the previous combo once to get access to the second one, and so on. Point 7. Waiting your turn. The bar on the top is your enemy, the one below is you. Since Magna Carta is real-time turn-based, both parties have to wait for their turn, but even if you decide to not move or take too long to react, then the enemy will still go after your ass. The only way to stop this is by pressing triangle to either change style, run, or use items, which is something the game doesn't really teach you, you have to read it in the manual. Both parties have to reach this line, let's say, to be allowed to take action, and once an action is performed, the bar goes down. In general, you get more turns if you have more party members than the enemy or are simply on a higher level. Mind you, the enemy group does the same to you. This is the Trinity meter that goes up by 5% if you manage to hit all 3 buttons perfectly. At around 40%, you can unleash it, and that means your next attack will get stronger according to the percentage. On its own, this is an okay system, just like the styles you can use, but the real problems start with the next point. Point 8. You better smash those buttons. So to even be able to attack, you have to hit these buttons on the top circle. It's a similar system seen in Legend of Dragoon or better yet Shadowheart. But while this system was damn good and fun there, in here it's unnecessarily painful. I will explain why. So hitting the buttons at the right time isn't a problem, especially when you just need to hit the X and circle buttons and it's only 3 taps in general. Of course, only if you decide to use the critical, you then have to complete a full circle 4 times, meaning 12 buttons. Now, while that's fine on its own, the major problem comes with the fact that if you miss even once, you essentially lose your turn. Oh yeah, even if you hit the first 2 buttons but miss the 3rd one, then you still lose your turn completely. Not only that, your style goes down to level 1 as well, and your Trinity meter goes down to 0. Essentially you get punished in 3 different ways for missing just once. Doesn't matter if it's a standard mode, critical mode, or even encounter mode. Why? Miss once, everything goes down and you have to rebuild everything again, which makes the slightly slow nature of the battle system way slower than it needs to be, and that will get frustrating fast. So absolutely mastering this system will be a must. You have to eat that shit for breakfast. At least in Legend of Dragoon, you would hit the enemy once even before pressing any buttons to continue the combo. In Shadowheart, you could miss a field at some point and the character would still hit the enemy for as many times as you mash the other fields. But in Magna Carta, the game says, fuck you! Being unforgiving is one thing, and it would be fine if the game were unforgiving in terms of difficulty. But this is just plain frustrating. Point 9. The party. You have a party of 3 and my question is, for what? I asked this because you can only control 1 character at a time while the other 2 just stay there. And this isn't like Final Fantasy or something where you control a character at a time but all characters still get their turn. In here you can just use 1 character for essentially everything, and as a result the remaining 2 just stay there like idiots because you don't need to use them at all, and there is no AI that controls them like for example in Star Ocean or Tales of series. There are only a few exceptions where you should use another character, but you still don't have to. And one of those exceptions is when you fight boss battles and you might need a healer. But even then, you can also use items, so you generally don't even need a healer. Another exception might be the type of enemies you fight, because enemies that use magic are generally weak against physical attacks, while enemies that use physical attacks tend to be weak against magic attacks. So, for example, an enemy that is weak against magic will be attacked by Aeonis, while Kalnitz blocks the enemy's way and acts as a tank. And no, the enemy AI isn't all that smart. But even then, more than 1 character is usually not needed. But here's the thing, once you master the counter, you don't need a second character for anything. You don't even need to heal because the enemy won't even get a chance to attack at all. Heck, I've beaten the final boss that has 2 forms with the counter alone. That also does more damage than your normal attacks, and that should tell you a lot. I also got the impression that you don't really need to level up at all, and I might be wrong here, because I think that the enemies level with you, similar to Final Fantasy VIII. I started to notice this because when I defeated the monsters in one area and I returned to the same area because the story forces me to, around 15 levels later or so, yes, backtracking is this game's religion, I guess, they were as hard to beat as they were before, so they might indeed level up with you. Point 10. The frustration. The overall problem in Magna Carta isn't even the fact that it uses systems that were already seen in one form or another in older games. It's that the individual systems they have here, while fine on their own and they work well, putting them together turns the game into a frustrating experience. Magna Carta might be the perfect example of having ideas that look good on paper, but practically it makes you want to throw the fucking game out the fucking window. Technically, I'm still not done. I will speed it up a bit here. There is a friendship system that doesn't affect as much as it should. Occasionally you will be able to talk to your party members once you want to save or something. Depending on the answer you give, they might trust you more or trust you less. However, this barely has any effect on anything. You can give your party members gifts to attempt to raise their friendship towards you, but again, it barely does anything. There's this communicator that essentially works like a stationary phone, I guess. From time to time, well, only when it's to progress the story, you will have to use this communicator to talk to characters that are in different cities. Well, at least the developers don't force you to walk all the way back to where you were on a rare occasion. You know, seeing how much the developers loved to punish the player by forcing them to run through the same areas a million times. When the group gets split, you have zero choice on who goes with who. The game itself chooses for you, and yeah, sure, I know it's mainly because it's story related and the group needs to be split in a specific way, but why show us this screen then? It makes the impression that you can split the group to your liking when you can't. The chi on these lanterns can be changed, so you can take advantage of the chi in the area, which is an okay mechanic. The quest system is rather annoying because you can only take one quest at a time, and even when completed, they only give you kind of average rewards. Heck, even when you have taken on a quest in one city, you carry that on until you go back to the same quest giver to clear that quest or abort it. You can't go to a new city and replace the quest. This shit makes players not wanting to do any quests at all. The few ones I've cleared was only because I already had all the items with me and could instantly clear it. Absolutely unnecessary how they've done this.
Saved? There's no use changing the subject. We just want back what you humans stole. It was originally ours. I'm sure you already know, but we have...
I could go on and on because I'm still not done, but I will stop here. The video is more than long enough and nobody cares about it anyway. Overall, Magna Carta isn't necessarily a bad game. It certainly has a lot of things that work well. The story is kind of interesting, the sound is good, visually it looks good, but has clear, rough edges here and there, and the battle system could have worked. but they didn't really think it through, made it unnecessarily painful to experience and have fun with. But combine that together with the painful voice acting as well, the dash and the tech modes, and you have a game here that likely might bore you almost to death.
It was over before it started. All too easy.